Okay, welcome along everyone to this this webinar on using your school grounds for outdoor learning, hosted by Dawn and Anna. Dawn and Anna, over to you.
Hi there. Hello, Amber and Holly. I know we had several more people booked on, so hopefully they'll join us as we go, but it seems unfair to keep people waiting who've arrived on time. So we will get going. Hopefully the title on the screen is what you're expecting. We're going to be talking about using your school grounds for outdoor learning. But just to introduce ourselves, there we go. So we are Dawn and Anna. Very similar surnames, no relations, but we both do very similar things. We are both very experienced outdoor learning professionals, and we are co-hosts, or also co-chairs, I should say, of the Institute for Outdoor Learning, curriculum-based outdoor learning and field studies professional practice group. So that's why we are here today, talking about what we do. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, this next slide, there we go, is what we hope to cover this session. So we're going to talk a little bit about actually what is curriculum-based outdoor learning. Don't want to make assumptions that everybody is familiar with what we mean by that. Then we're going to move on to the main part of the webinar, which is looking at how you can use your site, whether it's a school site or whether you're based in work in a community centre or you use a local park. Whatever your site is, how can you use it for curriculum-based outdoor learning? So that'll be the main part of what we talk about. Then we will look a little bit sort of beyond the school gates, we've called it, so sort of a bit wider, and how you could take it a bit further. And then finally we'll finish up with a bit of a what next. So if you're inspired and you want to find out a bit more, where can you go for more information and more support? So what is curriculum-based outdoor learning? Well, it's part of the outdoor learning family, or as I like to think of it, the outdoor learning tree, represented there by that graphic, which has many, many branches, more branches, in fact, than are on that graphic there, but there's some ideas there. So we've got things like field studies, education for sustainable development, forest school, outdoor adventurous activities, sports, so even PE that you do at school. If it's happening outdoors, it's outdoor learning. But what we're particularly interested in today is this one. It's the curriculum-based outdoor learning. And I will say at this point that curriculum-based outdoor learning is not the same as field studies. We get lots of confusion between the two, and there is a lot of overlap in the kind of activities that you might do between the two. The difference is the direction you're approaching them from. I always think forest school is a learner-led process, very much about personal growth and development. Curriculum-based outdoor learning is, as it suggests, very much about delivering the curriculum. So it's teacher-led. Teachers are deciding what the learning outcomes are that need to come from any activities that they're doing. So that's what we're going to be focusing on here today. And I like to think of the curriculum as this represented by this bookshelf here, a bookcase. And some bits of the curriculum lend themselves obviously to teaching outdoors. So things like biology and geography fieldwork, naturally we think of those as going outdoors. If you're studying a river, you really need to get out and look at that river. And then physical education, the field sports I've already mentioned, those take place outdoors. There's then a chunk of the bookcase, and I've been generous because I've given it 2 shelves here, which are things that really should be delivered indoors. And some examples there are things like chemistry experiments or computer science programming. Basically, if it uses a specialist piece of equipment and that piece of equipment is designed to be used indoors, then that's probably where you should be doing it. But what that leaves is a whole chunk of the bookshelf there, which actually could be delivered indoors or outdoors. And it's usually delivered indoors, but I would say that that's because that's what we usually are used to doing. And it's the way it's always been, so that's the way we continue to do it. But what I'd like to do is challenge people to think a little bit about, well, why am I delivering that part of the curriculum indoors? And could it be delivered outdoors? Because we know there are so many benefits to taking young people and taking their learning outdoors. So what we hope to do in the next hour or so is give you a few ideas, suggestions about how you could take some of those curriculum subjects from the classroom and actually think about teaching them a little bit differently outdoors using the spaces that you have available to you. So at this point, I'm going to pass over to Dawn.
Great, thank you, Anna. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on what the majority of schools have in their school grounds. So what we're talking about initially, and for the majority of the session, as Anna said, is what's within your school boundary. So without going outside the school gate and into the real world, as it were, what you've got outside of your classrooms. Now, this is going to vary from school to school, but in this graphic, can I have a next slide, please? We can see the majority of what most schools have. Now, some schools have got an awful lot of green space. Some of them have a lot of grey space, but there is usually a mixture of some kind. So we're going to go through each of these potential locations and give you ideas of how to use that to teach the curriculum. So it's, you may think, oh, we don't have any trees, or we've got a tiny field, or we don't have a pond. But hopefully, as we go through each of these different areas and locations, you can see something that you've got in your school grounds that you can use for teaching. Because it doesn't have to be necessarily natural for it to be a useful use of outdoor learning and using CBOL, because everything outside is a potential learning opportunity. So I'm going to start with some of the more urban and more unnatural spaces, and then we're going to move more into the natural spaces. So starting with ones that the majority of people tend to ignore because they have a function which tends to be holding your school up. But in fact, they've got the potential for using as a resource as well as a learning tool. So the walls and the doors associated with your building can be used for teaching curriculum. And if you have a look at the example on the right here, this is when I had a project with some year 6 students, and they were given a task as a design technology challenge. And their DT challenge was that they had to create some STEM activities in their outdoor area. And all they had was a fence line and other parts of that area, which were just walls as well. So they had to build something. But in fact, if you look at the walls you've got in your building, if you can actually use that as a replica of the walls you've got internally, so many of schools' indoor walls are used as learning walls or as working walls. And you've got a lot of information there that if you've got independent working going on, children go to them and use those. So trying to use those walls to replicate it. So it might be that you've got maths functions, you might have words, wow words or spelling words or anything to do with your topic. So recreating them outdoors on your walls means that the students who are using those internally as resources and as tools for their work to be independent can do the same when they're outdoors. And also things like ID guides. So if you're doing mini beast hunts and you've got nice pictures of insects that you found in your school grounds. Another project that I did with a school was they did a mini beast hunt in their school grounds. They then created some fact files on those insects. They then turned them into actual information boards and stuck them on the walls of their school, so that when other year groups went on mini beast hunts, they could then go to the wall, look for their animals and identify them. And they knew that it was suitable for that school because it had been made bespoke by the year 4 children. Also, thinking about the actual structures you've got within your walls, there's a lot of shapes that you've got there and a lot of potential for teaching maths. So every school has got windows. Some schools have got bricks. Some schools have got different textures or different materials that they're made out of. And these can be used either for just doing some assessment of understanding of mathematical concepts, such as estimating. When you go outside, you could ask them to estimate how many planks of wood, if it's a fence, how many bits or how many bricks, if you've got brickwork exposed. Now, you're not asking them to count the number of bricks in your school wall, but you can estimate them and they can use their skills of estimating that you might have taught them inside to apply that skill in another context, in a much wider context. You've also probably got things like doors and windows, and you can use them to look at concepts such as symmetry. And a good way of doing that is there used to be a really good app. I don't know whether it still exists, but you probably can do, because you can do everything on computers now. But you could take a photo of half a wall or half a door or half a window, and then you can rotate it and you can get the mirror image of it right next to it. So then you can compare that to what you see, and you can see if you've actually got symmetry within that. And things like doors and windows are quite good looking for symmetry before you then might move into a more natural space and look for symmetry in nature. So it's a comparative study you might be doing. You've also got a lot of textures within those walls. So depending on what your school is made out of, you could use that to collect textures and patterns, either by sketching, or a nice way is to collect it using foil. So if you get foil and rub it onto different textures and looking for patterns, you can do that as like a hunt. And I've done it with pairs. So one of them goes out, finds a texture, rubs it on the foil, brings it back, gives it to their partner. Their partner then has to go out and try and find where the texture was found, and then recreate it using another piece of foil. And it's also inspiration for artwork as well. You can use it for colours. A lot of schools nowadays in Wales, I'm not sure about in England, but there's a huge, big resurgence of graffiti, bringing in experts to do graffiti and art murals on walls. And again, that could provide you with inspiration for doing stories. It's a backdrop for performance. So if you've done a story, then you could perform it outside with this backdrop. I went to one school recently, and I'm lucky because I live on Gower and we've got some amazing beaches and landscapes. And an artist had come in and had drawn the landscape around the area all over the outside walls of the school. So it was almost like, okay, we have this landscape that is round the corner, but it's pictured here. So we can look at it for teaching geography, and also for looking at mapping and looking at changes in landforms. So it was a great teaching resource along that. Some schools are doing murals of history. So again, you can use it as a teaching tool for that. So don't ignore the obvious that you're just basically, keeping the school up. It could be a potential learning opportunity there. Next slide, please.
So I think the next slide is where I take over, and there we go. So moving out beyond your walls and doors, probably what you come to next is your playground. And even if your playground is just a big expanse of tarmac, what it really gives you is space. So this is where I would encourage you to think about all those things that you would like to do in your classroom, but you think, I just don't have room with all these tables and chairs in the way. You can head outside and use your playground. So one of the simplest is just to use it for learning games. Get the children running around. You can see here we've got someone holding up a board that says yes. There's presumably somebody else holding up one that says no. Children have just been asked a question and want to answer it. You could do that for all sorts of different assessment for learning games, but just to get them outside, get them active, and get them running around as part of their learning. Sort of next step on from that is thinking about your playground as a giant canvas. So get yourself some chalks. At this time of year, all the supermarkets are filled with those great big playground chalks that you can find, aren't they? And you can supersize anything that you would usually be getting your learners drawing or writing in their books. And drawing on the playground feels a little bit naughty, doesn't it? And doing things that are a little bit naughty and a bit unusual are fun. So that's why we're doing this. It's making the learning fun. It's making it memorable. And you can see that there are lots of different things that you can do. The girl on the left there is clearly drawing a rather accurate, actually, diagram of the internal organs of the human body. We've got some maths going on there. We've got some Venn diagrams. We've got a lovely bar chart there, presumably showing, I think, looks like the results of a mini beast hunt, maybe. But yeah, absolutely anything that you would normally be drawing or writing inside, you can get them outside, and using the playground as a giant chalkboard. If you need a record for learning, well, take a photograph, and then it doesn't matter that it's going to get washed away by the rain as soon as the next shower comes. You may find if you're fortunate that, oh, hang on, no, sorry, I'm going too far ahead. Next step up from that is to think about making the learning interactive. So once you've got your drawings on the playground, can you get the learners inside the drawings in some way? So this diagram is showing children who have got an electrical circuit drawn on their playground, and they're about to become the electrons running around inside that circuit. Full disclosure, that image was AI generated because unfortunately, although I have done this activity, I didn't take photographs at the time. So if that's why they look a bit peculiar, it's the wonders of AI. But other things you could do it with, if you're thinking about circulation in plants, water transport in plants, you could draw some massive plants on the playground, get the children being the plants, the water going up through the plants. You could draw river systems on your playground and get the children being the water moving around in the river systems. Just really limited by your imagination there. But think about how once you've got some diagrams and some drawings on the playground, you can get inside them. You may have some markings already on your playground, and lots of primary schools do. But how do you use those markings? So there are lots of ways. So this is a fairly common one, a 100 square marked out. This is brilliant for maths challenges. So when you do those sort of 5 in 5 type maths challenges that lots of schools do, the quick mental arithmetics, rather than again doing them on their notebooks or on the little mini whiteboards, get them outside, get them drawing on the playground with their chalks or do their calculations. And then once they've got an answer, either put some sort of marker token or even put themselves on the square for their correct answer. Lots of ways that you can use those for maths challenges. Playground markings are also really good for other maths related things. So you can do measurements, get the tape measures out, do some estimating, and then do some measuring to see whether you're right. You can work out area calculations. So with your circles and triangles where you're working out areas, again, instead of doing it with pictures in books, get outside and do it for real using the markings that you've got on your playground. You can do scale drawings. So here we go. You've got a basketball court marked out on your school playground. Can you then measure it and use those measurements to do a scale drawing of that in your book? And also directional language. If you've got lots of lines marked out there, that's really lovely for talking about directional language. And you can get your learners to write instructions for each other that they have to follow. Go forward, turn left, turn right. See if they can plan out a route and then get another learner to follow that same route around your playground. Again, great way of getting the learning active, getting the learners out from behind their desks, off their chairs, and moving around to make that learning much more interactive, much more fun and memorable, and much better for those learners who learn in an active way. So I'm about to hand over again, I think, there we go, to Dawn, who is going to talk to you about playground equipment.
Thank you, Anna. Right, so quite a lot of schools now have got play equipment in their school grounds, and there's lots of trim trails out there and climbing frames and things like that, which of course are brilliant for playtime, but they're also a potential ways of reenacting and recreating things that you don't have in your school grounds. So this picture here is a pirate ship, obviously, which I created with a class that came out. And we took a lot of time trying to think about ways in which we could create it into a pirate ship, because it's not a pirate ship, but a lot about the imagination was required here, but also an awful lot of skills development. So all the white pieces of paper you can see there were flags that they drew first, and then they were given pulleys, and they had to actually hoist all their flags using the pulleys, so we could do working on forces as well. And of course, we needed a sail. So trying to get the sail up and trying to make sure the wind was blowing it in the right direction. So there was a lot of learning about forces and other science there. But in fact, the best bit was after it had been built and they got to just play. So they were playing on this pirate ship and they were coming up with little adventures and they were putting things in that they required and that was missing. And I had another experience where we actually made a pirate ship because we didn't have a play area. Out of sticks, and that little moment of 20 minutes or so just playing and just experiencing being in a pirate ship, when they went back into class, because the pirate ship itself was not the end result, although it was great fun. When they went back into class, the follow-up work that they did, which is where the assessment of their learning and understanding was, and also the benefits of that experience was shown and assessed, was the actual work that they did in terms of a narrative of being in a pirate ship. So they wrote a story about what it was like to be in a pirate ship. And the quality of the written work was so much better because they'd been playing in a pirate ship for 20 minutes. So sometimes activities like this, where you think, okay, this is great, but what are we learning? The learning happens during the play or during the build up. And then when you go back into school, the actual follow-up is so important to undertake that embedding of the experience, but also feeding out the skills into aspects of their work. So it's very important with all these activities that there's work that you do in class and you build on that outside, and then when you go back in, you feed from what they've learned. So they might go in a slightly different area. The other thing you can do with equipment like this is that you can use it for trim trail and for what it's used for, but then the students can use some language that you're using in school as well. So things like directional language. So they're giving their instructions orally and having to say that they have to turn left, right, or 90 degrees turn anti-clockwise, or they've got to climb up 2 meters. So you can use some good oracy skills, but also check their understanding of directional language. I've said already about sciences and forces, but if you've got something which is play equipment which gets height, there's a lot that you can use that for. So you can do about forces, you can do about levers and pulleys, but it's also a good opportunity to things like dropping parachutes, looking at air resistance, because I know some of the schools I work in are all ground floor. They do not have a second floor. And so you can, if you're allowed to climb up to the top in playtime, then you can use that as a high area to drop any, eggs with parachutes on and see whether they break. So using it as a potential high area as well. You've also got different materials there. So you can literally look at this play equipment because it's built to stand the weather and to be strong. It's good to do some surveys of the materials you've got if you're looking at that area of science and thinking of why they chose those particular materials. So looking at properties, and you can see things like connections, how they're connecting the different materials together. What are they using? So it's a good example of construction that you can access very safely and try and replicate in a smaller version. Say you could recreate it in Connects or Lego and see how it's been designed to make it strong. So you're looking there not only at the design, but also at things like angles, which feeds into maths. So what is the strongest angle? Have they built, like you can see the pole coming down at the top, there's a very acute angle. So kind of identifying angles in construction and how they make sure that that strength is going to be able to support what is required. Okay, thank you. I think it's Anna, your turn.
Thank you. Yeah. So continuing to sort of move outwards from this imaginary generic primary school that we've created. You've headed out your building, you've gone across your playground, past your play equipment, and now you're out on your playing field. And playing fields vary so much. You might just have a bit of grass, you might have other bits around it, but there are loads of different ways that you can use your playing field, whatever you have. One of the obvious ones that jumps to mind is, of course, science. If you've got plants there, you can link that in with the science curriculum, and particularly the biology curriculum at all key stages, right from your very most basic at foundation stage or key stage 1, all the way up to A level. There's loads that you can do out there looking at what's growing in your field. So some identification skills going on there, looking at what grows where. Do you have consistency across your playing field, or are there different things growing in different locations? And if that's the case, and it probably is, what factors are affecting the way that different things are growing in your school field? That bottom right picture there is a great example. That is an actual real picture this time. It's a primary school near me where they've got a ha-ha around the edge of their playing field. I've no idea how it gets past health and safety. But what you can see there is in the space of just a few meters, up on the top there, you've got the parched grass where obviously the soil is very thin. You can just see a bit beyond where the grass is a bit greener. At the bottom where obviously the water collects, you've got the lush growth. and then a bit beyond here, again, different. Now, I'm not suggesting that all schools have that level of variation, but you probably have got some areas where you've got a bit of shading, maybe from trees, some areas that are more heavily used or walked on. The edges closer to the paths might be different to the middle. So there's all sorts of things you can do there by going out and looking at what's growing on your school field and having a bit of curiosity about thinking, once you've observed these differences, can we explain them? What's going on there? Why are there these differences? So that obviously clearly links in with the science and the biology curriculum, but there are other things that you can do as well. So another thing that you can do with your playing field is turn it into, sorry, my computer's going a bit slow here. Next slide is use it as an art gallery, an outdoor open air art gallery, doing some natural art. Obvious links with the art and design curriculum there, going out and doing some art, but also linking it into learning about different artists that use natural materials in their work. People like Andy Goldsworthy, who go out and create art in the environment and then just leave it there to dissolve into the environment. But it doesn't have to just be about art. You can also, a bit like with the playground and drawing on the playground, you can think about any other diagrams or pictures that you might use as part of any other subjects. So the top right there you see is that particular example links in with the science, because it's a picture showing the layers in a woodland, so the structures of a woodland ecosystem. But it could have been a diagram showing river systems. It could have been showing mountain formation. It could have been a picture showing castle structures and how they've changed over history. Bottom left there, we've got some art inspired by mandalas. So that's linking in with religious education. And the bottom right is just a mind map. Instead of drawing a mind map in a book, they went out and created one outside in the school field. So natural art is something I really love because it's so versatile and can be used to link to all sorts of different subjects, just using what you find around you. It is worth thinking about the impact that you might have on the space, and it's worth thinking about rules about picking, whether you're going to allow picking of natural materials or not. If on your school field you've got loads of daisies and dandelions, you might want to say it's okay to pick those. But what that could lead on to is a conversation on why you might not want to pick things and what impact that might have on the environment. And I definitely recommend doing a bit of checking out yourself first about what they're likely to find before sending them out there, so that they don't start picking anything that's very, very fragile, very rare if you're lucky enough to have anything very rare on site, or of course anything that might be toxic, and always worth making sure they wash hands very well after handling natural materials. Your playing field also is a lovely space to do some map and compass work. So this links in obviously with the geography curriculum, but also the PE curriculum, where they have to do outdoor adventurous activities, a bit of orienteering. So it's a great way to get out and practice maps and compasses if you've got a map of your site. And most schools, you will find, if you dig around somewhere, there is a map that shows your site and the outline of the buildings and playground, much like this. If you can't find one, if you haven't got one, Google Maps is a brilliant resource. You can go onto Google Maps, get an aerial view, and then just simply trace the outlines of the features that you want to include, so that you can create your own trails around your site. So you can set up your own orienteering trails very simply by making some markers. You can see that picture on the right there is just a bit of laminated paper tied to a tree. So you can set up your own trails, or you can get your learners to create their own trails for others to follow. So there you're bringing in extra skills, because not only are they having to follow a map to find a location, but if they're setting it up themselves, they have to work out where they are on a map and plot that location correctly for others to find. But it doesn't have to stop at the geography and the PE curriculum, because once you've got a base map, you can then use that to create activity trails. So trails where learners go round using their map skills to find the different locations. But once they get there, they will find an activity or a challenge that you've set up for them. So it could be, for example, a maths trail. They might go to a location and find a question relating to some aspects of the what they can see around them. Maybe it's, count the number of doors, multiply it by the number of windows, that kind of thing. But we do loads of different trails where I work. We have poetry trails where we stash lines of poetry around, and they have to follow the map to find them and then recreate the poem in the right order. But you can also use it as an assessment for learning tool. So at the end of a unit, where you usually have that little quiz where you check what they've learnt, you can make it more interactive again, getting the learners out and about, running around, by putting those questions as points on a trail rather than just sitting at their desks and doing it. Again, it's all about just making that learning interactive, getting it outdoors, that benefits those learners that don't do so well sitting in a classroom, but actually benefits all the learners by giving them that opportunity to get outdoors into the environment, which we know is so good for everybody. And so Dawn now is going to talk about planting areas.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anna. Now, quite a few schools now have planting areas, and they might vary from a little trug that's full of soil that you put some bulbs in to a polytunnel and an allotment area. And sometimes it can be quite overwhelming if you're coming to a school, or you've got a school that's got a planting area and you don't feel that you're green-fingered and you've got any kind of gardening skills, and you feel, oh, quick, I need to grow something. But planting areas can provide more opportunities than just growing. Growing is great if you've got a topic that's associated with that and you want to know about how plants grow and about farming and food. However, don't be misled that it's got to be growing something in those areas. You can use them for lots more than that. For example, it's a blank canvas for you to create models, and that's a great way of teaching geography. So this picture on the right, they didn't have a planting area, so I had to bring soil in trays. But if they had a planting area, it would have been a lot better for them to do a model of a river. And if you've got areas where you can dig, then you can create the landforms associated with something like a river system and use that to assess their understanding. This is a great thing to do after you've been on a field trip to see a river, because they can then come back to school and recreate that river that they've actually gone to see, and they can label the different parts of it based on what they've actually seen in real life in the actual river itself. Models of any landforms can be done like this. So we can look at mountains, we can look at other systems as well, but also you're introducing the fact that you've got something else going on a smaller scale, replicating it on a larger scale. So you're getting them to identify things that they've probably drawn pictures of in the classroom. The other thing we can look at is the processes taking place inside the planting area, such as the recycling of nutrients. And the picture here on the left is me holding up a partly decomposed piece of paper. And this was a science investigation that we undertook, looking at decomposition and rates of decomposition. So we planned our inquiry and we were looking at fair testing. So we were creating things that we could put into the veg patch, which was not growing anything. So we had a veg patch there, which was just soil. And we identified how to make sure it was a fair test. So we had to have the same size piece of material. We had to dig it into the same depth. We had to leave it for time. And then every time we dug it up, we had a look at them. So we had kitchen paper, we had A4 printer paper, we had some laminated paper, and I think we had some cardboard as well. That's the cardboard one there. And obviously this is a long-term project because you're not going to be decomposing by the end of the lesson. But if you've got this for a topic as in a term, then you could go back every week, carefully uncover it and have a look. And then you can start comparing it over time. So thinking about how you're going to collect data on how it's decomposed, and taking an image like a photo is a really good way. You could also discuss issues to do with how do we measure how big it is, because this started decomposing in my hands as I pulled it up. So how could we judge how much it's decomposed? So looking at the photo and then trying to calculate the area of it, but also we were just looking at time. How long did it take for it to disappear? And of course, our laminated sheet of paper didn't change at all over the term, and we kept revisiting it. And then it's a great way of then linking into sustainability, litter, plastic pollution, and issues to do with recycling. So again, building this into using your school grounds in your planting area, built in opportunities to carry on looking at things within the school, looking at recycling rates and how we can make our school more sustainable. The obvious thing when you have your planting area is looking at it as the science opportunity, looking at how plants grow and plant life cycles. As Anna was saying, using your field to see what is growing there and looking at the conditions for that to grow is almost a great starter for you to then move into your planting area and go, right, well, we found the largest number of plants in this side of the school, which hasn't got a lot of shelter. So there's nothing which is giving shadows. There's no trees or anything. It's not too windy. It's very warm. So how can we recreate those conditions so that we have plants growing in our planters? And if your planters are small, like a trug, like a bucket, you can literally move them and decide where's the best place to grow things. And that's a nice experiment, so that if each group in your class have got a trug, and then take that to where they think would be the best place to grow, and then they grow the same plants, they can see the success rate of those different plants in those different environments. And again, looking at fair testing, make sure they've got the same amount of water, but you could also measure how much water they're receiving by making a rain gauge. So it's just getting a pop bottle or a plastic bottle, cutting in half, turning the top half upside down, and then you're collecting water, and then you measure that as and when your plants grow. You can also look at plant life cycle. So you can go from seed to fruit, and that's a great opportunity for them to see how the actual plant changes over its lifetime. Whenever you're growing something, you have to be very aware of the seasons and making sure it fits in with your school timetable. Unfortunately, an awful lot of plants come into fruit or come into harvest time in August, which is not very helpful for a school. You also don't want to have your plants requiring an awful lot of watering, so that over the summer holidays or over the Easter holidays, they're going to die. So fast growing plants are useful. Ones that can grow all year round are useful. So things like lettuce, spinach, and then some of the robust ones like radishes that grow very quickly, potatoes. All of those can be done and dusted before you break up in August. Or you can go for the autumn ones and go for your pumpkins, and they will be ready in just before Christmas. And again, that's what fits in with the school timetable as well. So thinking about that. But also, of course, you've got flowers you can grow, and that's perfect for teaching so much science. And it also usually really fits in with the school timetable, because they're at their best in July and June, which is when you might be wanting to go out and do the majority of your outdoor learning, or lots of outdoor learning. So looking at those plants and watching them grow from seed, you could sprout them in the classroom on some kitchen paper. And then once they've got their little shoots and roots, you can then plant them out in your veg patch or in your planting area. You can watch the first leaves come up. You can then see them developing the flowers. You can look at that to watch the pollinators to see how they move the pollen around. You can then watch as the flower dies and turns into the fruit. You can then see how the fruit develops, or whatever kind of fruit seed mechanism it's got. You can dissect it to take out the seeds to see how they're being distributed, and then you're back to square one. So it's a great way for looking at that plant life cycle. Also looking at pollinators and looking at the type of pollinators that you've got in your school grounds, and also which plants they prefer. A nice investigation that I've done with nursery and reception is if we planted a lot of different flowers, or found an area with lots of different coloured flowers, and then next to each coloured flowers, I'd put a cup. And if that cup is the same colour as the flowers, it makes life a lot easier. Now, the children can then carry on doing an activity or can be playing there. And whenever they notice a pollinator visiting that plant, they put a Lego block into the cup. And you can do that over days or weeks or just a session. And then by the end, you should have some Lego blocks in some of those cups. You can then bring those together, put them together as Lego blocks, and you've basically made a bar graph showing the differences, and it'd be interesting to see which pollinators like which kind of colors. So if you've got lots of yellow flowers and that seems to be having the most pollinators, you can then think, right, okay, if we want to encourage more pollinators, we need to grow more yellow plants. So you can use it to think about creating even more wildlife in your school grounds. For older ones, you could do an investigation based on that, and then you can move on to what is it that the pollinators are actually looking for. Is it color, or is it shape, or is it smell? So as long as you start with using the real plants, you can then replicate them by just cutting out shapes in the same colors, putting them onto the ground, and see whether the pollinators actually go to the shape, or whether it's not just the color and the shape, they actually need something like the smell. So you can try and drill down into what the pollinators are looking for. So it links in well with the conditions that plants need, but also the conditions that the mini beasts and the pollinators are looking for as well. Lastly, maths. Basically, when you're planting, if you're doing any kind of growing, there is so much maths opportunities. If you just look at the back of a seed packet, it's all numbers. It's all about the month. So it's always a date. So it's always like the 5th month or the 4th month. That's when you plant it. It tells you how deep to put your seed. It tells you the distance between the rows, the distance between the plants. So there's so much number work there. But also, if you give a small area for your students to be responsible for and give them the opportunity to plant something, they can work out the best plant to grow there. So looking at your area that you've got, if you've got an area of 1 meter square, and you look at the back of a packet and it says that this plant has to grow 30 centimeters away from the next row of plants, how many plants will you be able to grow in that area? How many seeds can you put in? It's very tempting to just plant all the seeds you've got, but if you've got a pack of seeds for carrots, you'll have about 200 tiny seeds. And then you need actually a very large area to plant out all of those seeds. But it gives you that opportunity to work out what's the growing density and how much you need to put in, and following those instructions for plant depth and also for plant distances as well. Once they're growing, then great to then continue that maths by looking at growth rate. So growth rate could be the height of the plant over time. And a great thing to do is to integrate this into your normal daily routine. So once your plants are growing outside, you could then have somebody as a class monitor or your helper for the day. One of their jobs is to go out and measure the height of the plant. So we can then put that into like a spreadsheet, or write that down, or put that into books, and we can see how that growth rate changes over time. And then you can use that to graph. Or you can look for things like how many pea pods there are, or how many flowers there are. And again, you can see how that changes over time. And a good enterprise project in terms of planting and growing is to give them a small amount of money. So say they're given 20p, and they have to, within that small 1 meter square of growing area they've got with their partner, they have to generate as much money as they can. So they're going to grow something, and what they grow is up to them. If they haven't got enough money for a packet of seeds, they'll have to join with another group, and together they can buy a packet of seeds. Then they decide which ones are going to give them the most profit. So it could be that they're growing herbs, and then they sell little herb packets to their parents. So just cutting little bundles and selling those. It could be that they want to grow carrots and potatoes and all that, so they have to join together. Then they could either sell a veg box, or they could sell that as soup. So they have to then prepare it and put it in something, or smoothies if they're growing fruit. So there's a lot of opportunities there to make some money, but it's giving them that idea that this is going to take, if it doesn't work, they're obviously not going to make as much. So, and quite often things don't work when you're planting, but that's something that you will learn from as well, thinking about what went wrong. And also they could do this over time. So you could do it over years and years. And then in other years, you could think, right, okay, well, we planted potatoes, that didn't work. Right, we planted carrots, that didn't work. Right, we're going to plant flowers, we'll see if that works. And every year you can then see how your area works in terms of growing. And you can even do some sampling and find out if your soil is, a very sandy soil or a very clayey soil, and then do some research on what should be growing there and what would work well. So there's so many things you can do with your growing, but don't set yourself up that you have to grow prize tomatoes every year, because it is a big commitment. and think about how you can teach the curriculum through your growing, not how you can grow the best fruit and veg. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you. Wow, I'm not a gardener, but I'm feeling inspired to get out growing now. Okay, so I'm talking about trees, and most schools will have at least 1 or 2 trees, and that's all you need. So there are lots of different ways that you can use trees. Let's get the most obvious one out of the way first. Trees are growing things, and therefore, just like the grass on your playing field, it can be used for science. So species identification is a really good one that you can build in here. The science curriculum requires use of identification keys. So get out and start identifying what plants and trees that you've got growing in your school grounds. But don't spend a lot of money on identification keys. Make your own. So the one that you can see there on the left is a very simple identification key that's been made and that I use regularly with my groups. And it's made just by collecting the leaves from the trees that we have and putting them through the scanner. And once they're in the scanner, you can then take those images and put them into Publisher or Canva or whatever your software of choice is and create your own identification key. The advantage of doing that is it means that you can tailor it to what the learners are likely to find. There's nothing more demoralizing than being given an identification key with loads and loads of different things on, working your way through and then being told you've identified incorrectly. So making your own keys is a really good thing to do. Even better, get the learners to make the keys. So they can do that themselves. It could be simple picture keys like that, but once they've used those keys and got familiar with them, then you could have a go at writing dichotomous keys. Those are the ones that are like 20 questions, you know. Does it have round edges? Does it have jagged edges? Yes, no. And then they move down and work their way through that. That's a really nice way of getting them to practice those skills. And it doesn't have to just be the trees themselves, because there will be things living in the trees. So this is where we can start to look for some of the invertebrates that you might find. You will have to get them out of the tree to be able to identify them in most cases. So that's where you might do a bit of tree beating or tree shaking. So you'll need a little bit of equipment for that. Now you could splash out and buy yourself a fancy what we call beating sheet, but really that's just a square of fabric over a frame. So you can see in the picture there, that's a very simple homemade one, bit of old sheeting that's been stretched between some bamboo canes. You can even just use an upturned umbrella, to be honest. You give the branches a bit of a shake, see what falls out of it, and then you can identify what you found. And again, you can use your identification skills there to practice using keys or making keys. But the learning doesn't have to stop there. It doesn't have to just be the biology. Like Dawn said, it's great if you can then extend that, really maximize the opportunity for learning. So once you've identified things and counted them, well, as soon as you're introducing numbers, that gives you lots of opportunities for maths again, doesn't it? And different ways of recording your results, tally charts, counts, bar graphs. And, you know, going back to that picture on the playground, you don't have to do the graphing indoors. Get over to your playground and start drawing your graphs there so you can keep all of your learning outdoors. So that's science, but there's lots of other things that you can do with your trees as well. So there's some art here. Lots of different ways that you can use trees for art. You can do art of trees, like the one on the left. There's some lovely Mondrian-inspired tree drawings there. You can use your trees and your leaves to create art. So a bit like the natural art that I showed you earlier, you can just use the actual leaves themselves to create pictures. What you're seeing on that picture there in the middle is something called hapazome, which is where you get the leaves and you sandwich them between layers of, in this case, fabric, but you can do it with paper as well. And then you bash them with a rolling pin or a smooth stone, anything you like. But what it's doing is squishing out the juices and leaving an imprint behind. So that's a really fun activity to do with your learners. Again, like this one, you can then identify them, so you can create your very own identification key that way, but you can also use it in a more artistic way if you're a bit more careful about how you place the leaves and what you then do with those prints that you've got. Or create art on your trees. So again, a little bit like the wild art there. We can see that somebody there, or we've embellished features on the trees to create some art there. So that's where we've challenged the learners to look and see if they can find faces in trees. And that's so great because so many trees have lovely gnarly features that you can start to imagine faces even without anything. But then with a little bit of added bits clay, or if your mud is nice and clay anyway, you can just dig up the mud from your playground and then add on some natural features. And then that can create stimulus for all sorts of other things, some creative writing about this creature that you've created that is emerging from the tree. So lots of art things that you can do. You can link to the design and technology curriculum. Sorry, I'm telling it to change slides, but it's been very slow. Come on. There we go. Probably jump 3 now. Bit of design and technology. So trees are structural in themselves as they're standing with their trunks and their branches, but then with the branches and the twigs that drop off them. So den building is a really popular activity. We do loads of den building where I deliver most of my sessions. And yes, it's a great fun activity and it's lovely for getting the children working together in teams. But there's lots of thinking involved about the structures and the materials that they're going to be using, about how those different materials interact with each other, what's going to be best for making the strength, the structure of the shelter. How are they going to make it more comfortable inside by thinking about what materials they might want to use to create the floor, creating a bit of shelter as well. So you can see sometimes we're kind and we provide a tarpaulin sheet for them. Sometimes we're not so kind and they just have to use whatever they can find. But the trees are a really important part of that, usually providing that base structure. If you don't have lots of trees, and if your groundskeeper is very tidy about clearing away any twigs and branches as soon as they fall, then you can always bring in materials to use, and that's something that we do as well. In fact, if you look at that den there with the tarpaulin, there are some poles there that are hazel poles that we've cut from elsewhere on site and bring in. When we're running low of natural materials in our site, we'll bring in stuff from off-site. But it's always worth as well having a chat to whoever it is that looks after your site, whether you've got a site manager or if it's contractors that come and do the work for you. And just especially if you've got tree work going on, if you've got tree surgeons coming in, just have a word and say, don't take the stuff off-site. Can you just make a pile of it for us somewhere? Generally, they're happy to do that because actually they have to pay to get rid of it. So if they can just leave it somewhere on site for you to use, they're quite happy to do that. And yet you can see there we've got big dens, we've got small scale dens for younger children. One that we often do is making houses for the 3 little pigs. That's a lovely one for Key Stage 1 learners. We talk about the story of the 3 little pigs and the materials that are mentioned in the story and talk about their characteristics and what makes them good and what makes them bad. And then they're challenged to build their own house for the 3 little pig, or one of the 3 little pigs. We give them a little toy pig that they have to build a house for. But you can do that for other things as well, having a selection of different toy animals and challenging the learners to think about what kind of house they might like and can they build a house for that creature. Using the natural materials that you've got is a lovely activity to do, and they'll get really into it. You get all sorts of gardens. I've had jacuzzis built for piggies before now and all sorts of things. So yeah, lots of different things and lots of different crafts that you can do with the materials that come from your trees as well. So just, have a little look, get out there, have a look on the internet for some inspiration. There's loads of things that you can do. I'm veering a little bit into forest school territory, so I'm going to veer back now and pull myself back to talk about how you can use trees to cover the maths curriculum as well. So we talked about actually when you've counted things, you can do the diagrams and graphs and things. But trees themselves provide lots of opportunities for brilliant maths work when you think about how you can measure the trees. So you can measure the height of the trees, and that brings in lots of fantastic trigonometry. So you can see there that little diagram showing somebody with the angles that are involved in measuring trees. They're using a piece of equipment called a clinometer on this little one here, which is where you look through it and hold it, and it tells you the angle that you're looking at. So if you can create a right angle triangle between yourself and the tree, you can work out the height, because it will be the same as the distance that you are from the tree. But a really simple way that uses the same maths is what's going on here this person bending over and looking between their legs, because the idea here is that you are creating a corner of that triangle yourself. And if you can get your head as close to the ground as possible and then look between your legs, you are creating that 45-degree angle. When you can see the top of the tree, you are as far away from the tree as the tree is tall. So that's a really fun one to do with young learners. They love doing it. And actually, they're much better at it than us older people. I can't get my head anywhere near the ground anymore when I do that. So I have to add the distance from my head to the ground as well to get an accurate result. But they can be doing that. It brings in lots of opportunities to talk about angles. And then, of course, the measuring that you do as you measure the distance to the tree to calculate its height. You can measure the canopy of the tree. So starting with your back against the trunk of the tree and walking out until you're standing underneath the very tip of the furthest branch. And from that, you can work out the reach of the canopy. If you do that a few times as you go round the tree, you can work out the area that the canopy covers. If you do that at different compass points, you're bringing in compass work as well to do your measuring of the tree. And at the top here, we've got somebody reaching their arms around the tree. They're measuring the girth of the tree, how far it is all the way round. So there's some great measuring there that you could do. Again, some estimating and then some measuring. Either do it with tape measures or, as you can see there in the picture, get the children to stretch their arms around it. Once you know how big your tree is all the way around, you can then calculate the age of the tree. If you know what species it is, different trees have slightly different calculations, but you can work out the age of the tree if you know the girth of the tree. So there you can then start to bring in some history as well. What's happened in the lifetime of that tree? If you know how old it is, when was it planted? What was it going on there? What history has it seen? And then bring in some literacy. You can get them to write the story of the tree. What's it seen in its life cycle, a diary of the tree. And then finally, in the bottom right here, we're looking at shapes and angles. It's a great one to do actually in the autumn and winter when the leaves are off the trees, and then you can just see the branches. And there are so many fabulous angles and shapes that you can find there. So you could give your learners some cutout shapes to find and see if they can match them with the trees, or some angles that are made, some cardboard cut to different angles, and they have to hold them up and see if they can match those angles in a canopy. Another way of doing a similar thing is if you've got access to things like iPads where you can go out and take photographs. You can challenge the learners to go out and find some angles, take the photograph of them, and then actually measure the angles that they found. So using the actual protractor, and that's where you can bring it back into the classroom as well. So there's lots of estimating and measuring that you can do there with shapes and angles. Again, it's another lovely one to do at all different levels, different key stages, from very simple, can you find a triangle shape in this tree, to can you find a specific angle and can you then measure it? And then can you work out what some other angles might be from the one that you've got? So lots of different ways that you can use that. Could go on for ages about trees. There's loads of things that you can do, but I'm going to pass over to Dawn again now to talk about ponds and puddles.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anna. Now, again, lots of schools used to have ponds, and sometimes they get a bit overgrown because they've got huge ponds which they can't maintain. But slightly, easier to look at is puddles. And if you've got a yard and it's been, or a playground and it's been raining, you do have a puddle. So the puddles that are being used in your school grounds, potentially, if you know it's going to be very wet, but at certain times of the year, you can use it for teaching a lot in maths. So looking at volumes of puddles are quite temporary things. So of course you need to work quite quickly if you're going to use some maths. But it could be that you task them with measuring the diameter of the puddle. And again, you're assessing their understanding of what that word means. They could be measuring the depth of the puddle. They could be measuring the area or calculating the area of that. So again, you can assess their understanding of those key mathematical concepts. There's also a nice challenge that I like to do, which I call CSI puddle. And I put out a load of buckets outside. So you don't need a puddle because you're going to make your own puddles. So you have buckets of water outside, and then next to a few of them is some objects. So it could be like a small stone, it could be a ball, it could be a stick. And you are going to see which one creates a certain size puddle. So you can say, right, somebody has dropped something into the bucket here and created this big puddle. And then they have to work out which object would create that size puddle. It's never going to be exactly the same, but you can use different things with different weights, different sizes, and they can do an investigation into what size creates what size puddle. Can be quite wet. Lovely to do when it's really hot, like it has been here in the last few weeks. If you've got something bigger than a puddle, so if you've got a pond, then again, that provides you with a lot of science and also some English inspiration as well, and some DT. But again, if you haven't, you can replicate it by putting water into something. So if you're looking at design technology and creating boats and looking at floating and sinking, you do not have to have a pond. You just need to have a container that holds onto water. So just as a temporary feature that you can use for investigating those, tough trays, if you're doing boats, doesn't have to be very deep. But if you're looking at floating and sinking, a see-through box is useful, and you put water in there and then they can see if it's floating or it's sinking. And a nice investigation is to put those two together, is for them to create a boat and then to try and get that boat to see how much weight it will take before it sinks. So you can add more and more stones or something on it and see what design will create the most buoyant boat that will hold the most weight. And a nice one to also do is to try and get them to not create a floating boat, but to actually design a submarine. Now, that submarine does not sit on the bottom of the box or the pond; it floats in the middle. So you're trying to make a neutrally buoyant boat, which is quite a tricky thing. So you can use obviously floating or sinking items and kind of combine them together, tying them together with strings. So you've got stones and sticks. If you combine them, can you make it be neutrally buoyant? Or you can use plastics, so some unnatural materials which are very buoyant, and again see how they combine those. So it's a nice science investigation there. If you do have access to a pond, or you have got a pond in your school grounds, again, the small ponds are usually better. If you have a huge pond, maintenance-wise, it's very tricky to look after, and usually they end up being overgrown and it's very hard to actually access them. What I usually suggest, if you do have a big pond and it's getting a bit overwhelming, is that you actually create smaller ponds to go with it. And smaller ponds tend to be colonized very quickly, so you don't have to have a very long time before you've got some animals living in it. And when I say small pond, a washing up bowl that's been dug into the ground would be perfect. And also you don't have to worry so much about health and safety. You don't have to put up gates and put signs up for deep water, and they're usually much more accessible, because if you put them on the ground, then everyone can sit on the ground and use a tiny little net or even a sieve to actually do some dipping in it to see what's inside it. Inside your pond or your washing up bowl, very quickly will colonize with some incredible animals, which will provide you with a bigger range of mini beasts to explore, but also a great opportunity to look at life cycles. An awful lot of animals, including midges and flies, which will colonize almost straight away, have a life cycle which has a different adult and child or in immature form. So everybody does about frog spawn and looking at frogs, and again you can have that, but in fact there's some even more interesting animals that you can get if you've got a pond. So midges and life cycles of flies are very interesting, because you've got some weird larvae, and if you've got magnifying glasses and little pots with magnifying lids, just putting those into them, you can watch them squirming around, and then you'll see them pupate, or you'll see them start to come out of the water and start flying around. So you can look at how they're adapted to those two different environments. In the water, what's their body shape? How do they move? In the air, what's their body shape and how do they move, and how do they get away from the water and find a mate and lay their eggs? If you've got a more established pond or a bigger pond, you might find that you have some other animals which have great life cycles. Mayfly nymphs, if you've got moving water, but also you might find some dragonflies or damselflies. And again, fantastic opportunities to look at their life cycle. And also some beetles. Beetle life cycles are stunning. They're incredible. The difference between the nymph, the baby, and the adult are, you wouldn't even think they were the same animal. So some beautiful opportunities to look at these animals in depth, draw some pictures, label their parts, but also see them as they go from adult from young to adult, and then lay their eggs, and the whole cycle there. Adaptation as well. Of course, these animals living in the water have got different adaptations to animals living in the air. So you could do a comparative study between the animals in a pond compared to the animals you might find in the woods, like Anna said about doing some tree beating, or even in an area which you've got long grass, you could do some sweep netting. So you can look at animals in those different areas and see how they're adapted to live in the conditions there. Of course, living in underwater, you need to worry about breathing. So what have they got to make sure that they can survive there? And again, doing annotating photos and also doing some research. And if you've got a pond, a great activity again is to get your students to create a resource of the animals living in your pond. So again, you can get some great ID guides and keys, but if you've got one for your animals in your pond, you know that when your students, especially the younger ones, are using it to identify something, they're not going to come across a lesser spotted something that lives nowhere near your school. So you've got one that's bespoke to your school as well. Also, you've got bodies of water. You can do some math skills as well. So we can look at area, we can look at volume, we can look at adding challenge by saying, right, okay, we're going to build some new ponds. We want to make sure our ponds are so deep and so wide. What's the volume going to be? So they can actually plan this and build in some math skills and some design skills for them building these smaller ponds. And so they're involved in the creation of it. You can also look at ways of colonizing. So how we're going to make sure that the ponds have got varying depths, because that will bring a larger microclimate, micro habitats for different animals. So you need to make sure you've got different depths. So how do we make sure that we've got that? So we could add some things into our boxes as well, into our buckets. Also, being beside water is fantastic for health and well-being, but again, also very inspirational for things like storytelling. Depending on the size of your water, you could just literally sit next to it and read a story which has water in it. So it could be one like Kenzuki's Kingdom, when Michael goes off on a boat across the sea. And if you're telling this story while the students are sitting next to the water and watching the water, again, it can be much more empowering and much more real to them when you're talking about it. You could also talk about some of the great stories that we've got and introduce it in terms of like the Gruffalo and by the lake. So it's a location for storytelling as well. I went to a school once that had a model heron by their pond, and I always thought it'd be a nice activity to ask that heron what it saw that day, and then writing a story of the day in the life of that heron. So what did it see fly in? You know, what happened? So it's almost like a soap opera inside your pond, and recreating it based on somebody's point of view who lives in the pond or beside the pond. Right, I think we're over to you, Anna.
Thank you. So we have been moving out from the school buildings, past your playground, past your school field, past the trees and your growing area and your ponds and your puddles. We've now reached your boundaries. So you will have absolutely certain hedges or fences somewhere on your site, whether you've got several at different places or if they're just around the edge. Now, lots of what we've already talked about, you can use hedges and fences for. So hedges, well, they're basically small trees, aren't they? So anything that we talked about that you can do with trees, you can do with your hedges as well. And your fences, you know, that's similar to the walls and doors that Dawn started with right at the start. Lots of structural features there that can be used in those ways. But where they really come into their own is when you look at them as their function, which is as a boundary. So as soon as you've got a hedge or a fence, you've got two sides of the hedge and the fence. And that leads them to be really great for comparison studies. So within the science curriculum, you can start to look at what's going on either side and how that affects what's growing there, what's living there. If your hedge or your fence is large enough and dense enough, then it could be that it's having an impact on the environment in its own right. So it could be creating shading on one side or the other, or it could be acting as a barrier to sound one side or the other, or wind one side or the other. So it could be creating its own microclimates just by its very presence. So that leads to lots of lovely investigations that you can do around those different features. So lots of brilliant comparison studies that you can do as part of the science curriculum. They'll also link in to the geography curriculum as well, if you look at some of those things that are required there. Aside from that, you can start to look at what's actually on them and in them. So if you've got a lovely old fence, like this rickety old one that you can see in the picture, what you might well find is that you've got mosses and lichens growing on them. Now, lichens are fascinating. They're an incredible organism. They're actually not one organism in their own right. They are a combination where you get fungi and algae growing together in symbiosis. But they are really, really sensitive to air pollution. So they are used as an indicator of air quality. Depending on the type of lichen that you've got growing, it can be an indicator of whether you've got high air pollution or low air pollution. So if you've got lichen growing on your site, on fences or on walls, you can go and have a look. And firstly, there's all that science around, looking at what these fantastic and incredible organisms are. But then you can start to look in a bit more detail about where are they growing. If you've got a fence where one side has got a road running by it and the other side hasn't, have you got more lichens on one side than the other? If so, why? And you can start to think about what that's telling you about the air quality at different places within your school grounds or your near surroundings, if you want to venture a little bit further. Similarly, hedges, apart from their role as boundaries, can tell you about the history of your site. So really old hedges tend to have more species growing in them than newer ones. And there is a calculation you can do where you go and you count how many different shrub species are in your hedge. Oh, sorry, I don't know how I should do that. I've managed to turn 2 slides. Getting too excited about hedges. You can go and count how many species you've got, and that will tell you roughly how old that hedge is. And like the age of the tree, once you know how old your hedge is, that leads to lots of lovely introductions to history and what was happening in the world when your hedge was planted. What has your hedge seen? If you're doing a topic about the World War, was your hedge around during the World War? Did it see the World War? Did it narrowly avoid the Blitz or the bombing? So you can start to talk about what was happening and link that in to other things that you're talking about. And again, there's lovely opportunities there for literacy as well and creative writing around what your hedge has seen and what's been happening in the world in the life of your hedge.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Anna. Right, so we've pretty much covered everything you might have in your school grounds. So we're just going to quickly have a look outside the school gate. Now, if you want to go beyond your school gate, then obviously whatever's there depends on your location. And most schools usually have permission to go out of their school gate with their learners without you having to go and get extra permission. You obviously need ratios, so you need to have another member of staff at least. But sometimes just going outside the school grounds can provide another whole level of outdoor learning opportunities. We're not talking about going on a bus and going on a field trip, going further than you can walk. And it could be that you're directly outside your school gate, or if you've got something just around the corner, you've just walked down the road. So I'm just going to focus on things that everybody has in their local area, not anything specific, so that you can see the potential. And I'm just going to briefly go through these because this is almost like another whole webinar. So again, if your school is on a road, which probably it is, then we're looking at some maths opportunities, looking at traffic counts. So just going outside, looking at the impact of the traffic. So we could be doing counting of different types of vehicles, the number of vehicles. If you measure out a distance, then you can time the vehicles going from one to the other and you can calculate their speed, which is a very good way of working out if you're, got people speeding outside your school gates as well. And then if you can introduce the police as well, that they can come do speed cameras, that brings that whole level of traffic and safety together as a nice topic. You can also look at ratios of bikes to cars to lorries, changes over time, different times of the day, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of surveying you can do just outside your school gate. If you go a little bit further, again, doesn't matter what you've got in your school area, as long as it's safe to walk through. I know one of my schools has got no pavements outside their school in their roads because they're in a very rural area, so they can't actually go out, but they do have some footpaths out the back, so they can walk straight into the countryside. But if you've got roads or anything, you can use it to do some navigation. So creating maps or using an OS map or an A to Z map of your school ground, of your school area and just outside your school, you can then use that to do route planning, to find ways to get to specific sites. So you could be just walking down the road of your school and then doing a land use survey. So depending what you've got, it might be that you've just got a lot of houses. You could then look at what type of houses. Are they all same size houses? Have they all got gardens? Are they all the same age? Looking at the differences there. Or you could be looking for facilities. So it could be that you can walk to a local shop and see what kind of shops you've got there. Could be that you walk to a bus stop or pass a bus stop. You could be looking at pavement furniture, so benches or bins. Anything that you're surveying can feed into any aspect of topics that you're doing. So it could be looking at what is my area like, my place, or it could be that you're looking at things that are missing that you could try and encourage your local councillor to improve. So there's no dog poo bins, or there's no benches, or there's no dropped curves, so you couldn't access it. So there's an accessibility issue there. So thinking about what you could survey. You could also, if you have got local interest sites in terms of historical buildings, if you can walk to those, you could look for those and you could map them on your map, and you could create like a local history guide that you've got to the local area. A really nice activity you can do, this picture on the right here is called rephotography. If you've got old photos of your local learning area, and if you look online, there's a great website called geograph.org. And if you look at your area on a map, it will actually show you the photos that have been taken and then uploaded to that site of your local area. You could then use that as a site as a kind of guide to go and find these places. And then when you find it, you then re-photograph it. You take a photograph of what it's like today. You can also go back in time on Google Earth to see what the area was like and do a virtual tour of the same site in the year 2007, for example. And if you've had new houses built or the things have changed, like you've had new facilities kind of lost or not new shops have arrived, then you can use that to see how things have changed and do a kind of spot the difference by taking a photo now, compare it to a photo in the past online. All of these feed into an awful lot of English, so creating a local guide to your local area, looking at what you've got there. So it could be access to green space, so you could be a walk to your local park. It could be that you're doing access to historical buildings or access to things like churches, etc. Or you could go out and just look for certain words. So you could do a word hunt, looking for adjectives, metaphors, simile, and just looking for inspiration. And if your school grounds is not that inspiring, then maybe this is where you need to go to find that inspirational language. In terms of science, again, a lot of the things that Anna was saying about the barriers and the boundaries to your school, you can then expand on those and build that into an investigation down the area outside your school as well. So you could be looking at sound and how that gets less or more as you get further away from, say, a main road or a junction or even the school, and looking at how that could be affected by barriers like hedges. You could also look for the evidence of litter. And if there's a survey that you could do with litter getting further away from the school or further away from a takeaway or further away from another thing like a bus stop, you could then again write letters encouraging your local councillor to put up some more litter bins to help with that. A nice one to do also is looking at chewing gum. Is there a relationship between the distance away from a bus stop and the amount of chewing gum you find on the ground? And the lichen survey that Anna was talking about as well, you can do that in your school, in your local area as well. So a lot of them, it just provides another location and a broader view of a lot of the things that we've looked at. And again, also about if you've got green space, you can look at all of the plants and all the things we've said out, the activities to do with that as well. Right, next slide, please, Anna. Okay, the last thing we're going to look at now is basically, we've talked about lots of ideas here, but you might be inspired, but you might still need a bit of support. So we're just going to give you some ways in which you can follow up these ideas and ways you can expand on what you might be doing at the moment. There's lots of resources that we're providing as the IOL, as the curriculum-based outdoor learning group. Thinking about taking your teaching further afield, it might be that you want to just, right, okay, got these ideas, but I need to find out what's here. So have a look in your local learning area, go for a little walk around, find out what's there, and then you might have some ideas that you can use then. You might be thinking about going further afield in terms of field studies, on trips, and residential experiences. And if you want more support on that, we'd love you to join our curriculum-based outdoor learning and field studies group. So we've been developing this group. It's quite a new group, and we're trying to get more people involved. And also we want more teachers specifically. And hopefully we're going to be providing an awful lot more webinars, but also we've got a hub that we'll talk about in a minute that you can access resources online. You might be thinking you want some qualifications. There's a great range of qualifications accredited by IOL. So if you look on the IOL website for information, there's a lot of them on outdoor learning and some specifically to do with curriculum-based outdoor learning, which will give you some more support, but also some other ideas as well. Also, a really important thing is to make sure that you share your ideas and also get your ideas from other members of staff in your school. So thinking about sharing best practice and thinking about having continuity in things like the rules of using outdoor learning across the school. And you might feel inspired to become an outdoor learning coordinator in your school so that you can push it across all the year groups so that there's progression in outdoor learning. If you want to do some training, there's some ideas of the training that's available on the bottom of the screen there. So, but click on that. Sorry, I've gone ahead. And sorry, there. So you got the level 3 and the level 2 available there, which Anna and myself do. But look in your local area, look at the IOL website because there's lots available. Sorry, Anna, go ahead. If you look on the IOL website underneath the curriculum-based outdoor learning page, you'll find this is our teaching hub. And what we're trying to do is to gather links to all resources and support that you can have associated with curriculum-based outdoor learning. So this hub, hopefully we're adding to it, or more and more, it's getting bigger and bigger, but it's got this amazing document that the IOL created, this high quality outdoor learning 2025, which gives you so many, it covers the whole of outdoor learning, but it's a really good starting point if you're thinking, okay, I want to know more. This is the document to go to. Next slide, please. And I think, yeah, finally, this is just about our group. So we are all about engaging with curriculum-based outdoor learning and field studies. Myself and Anna work in the industry, but we're not in schools specifically. We teach schools and we teach outdoor learning to schools. So we'd love some more members who are directly doing this within the school system. And if this is something that you're interested in, then please get in touch. And if you're a member of the IOL, then you can join the curriculum-based outdoor learning and field studies group for free. It's all included in it. And hopefully we'll be providing some more information and working out what our members require and then supporting them in the future. Brilliant. Thank you, Amber. Excellent. Got one. Okay, next slide then. I think this is just questions.
Sorry, Dawn, I dropped this one in this afternoon because I thought we should do this. So if you are a member of the Institute for Outdoor Learning, you also get the Horizons magazine, which comes out quarterly. It's a really good read, lots of different subjects covered across the whole outdoor learning spectrum. But currently we have a little mini series going on within there about curriculum-based outdoor learning. So each edition, we're going to be covering a different suggested activity that you can use with your learners that can be used across lots of different areas to create kind of a toolbox of outdoor learning ideas that you can begin to develop and get your learners outside. Yeah, something else, another little benefit of your IOL membership if you do decide to join us, and we would love you to. Yes, that really is the last slide. So it's just, there you go. That's our details. if you want to jot those down, we're always happy to talk to people. So websites for the respective organisations that Dawn and I work for, and our email addresses there. So feel free to take those down and get in touch if you want to. And yeah, just any questions. If anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat, or there's only a small group of us, you can probably unmute and just shout at us.
Yeah.
Or you can go and enjoy your evening and drop us an email later. Thank you, Holly. Glad you found it useful.
Well, I thought that was brilliant. Thank you very much, ladies. Much appreciated. And